Well, good morning, everyone. We are right at 9 o'clock, and I wanted to welcome everybody to our program this morning around using core values to lead with empathy. I'm Michelle Bomberger, for those of you who don't already know me, a founder and CEO of Equinox Business Law Group. We're a law firm that provides a general counsel service to businesses as they start up and grow and change throughout their lives. So we're really excited to have you all here this morning and really excited to have Darren here to join us. Darren is actually a client of the firm. We've worked with him over a few years now. And when I was speaking with him most recently, he talked about the program of the Restored Leader and how he's expanding that into other areas of life, restored family, restored community. And it was so inspiring to hear how core values lead to empathy and lead to better leadership. And so when he offered to present at one of our programs, because he's a participant in these programs from time to time, as you all are, I jumped at the opportunity. And then he said, well, why don't we have you be the guinea pig? And then I maybe took a little bit of a step back. But it's been a really fun experience to work with his materials, and you all should have those materials. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to go through them at least at kind of a 30,000 foot level, and be able to kind of get some context around what we want to cover today. And Darren's going to provide us with some guidance, I suppose, on how we should look at the materials and maybe begin to implement them in our lives. So Darren, I'm going to turn this over to you to kick off our program.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me. And if you guys can't hear me at all, I'm sure we've got Hillary ensuring that audio is good and whatnot. So please raise your hand in the box if needed. But it's a real pleasure to be here. And one of the things that I'm certainly most passionate about, and you'll hear us talk today a bit about interests and the differences between that and passions, as well as values and core values, is to actually share and speak in a bigger forum. Most of what I do is actually one-on-one. And I also enjoy that. And that's where most of the work gets done. But to be able to kind of freely talk and have a bunch of people gather together in a group is a real passion of mine. And I like actually listening. And so that's the other thing that I enjoy. And I say these things to set up what's happening now in the next 30 minutes, where you guys will get a real nice view of how practically to work through a conversation about what core values mean to you and how they lead to becoming authentically empathetic. Now, the definition of empathy, if we really use that base from whatever dictionary we find valid, generally is going to speak directly to be able to understand other people's situations and their feelings, in particularly feelings. And that's an important element for people, regardless if you are a self-proclaimed introvert, extrovert, which don't even describe the feeling indication. Words that you use to describe yourself, in fact, have a lot to do with feelings. And as a leader, understanding those who follow you, how they are feeling, can encompass many different things. But the understanding of what they are feeling, their situation, context, is what we're going to talk about today as you grow in your leadership. So thank you, Michelle, for having a conversation with me. That's what real coaching is. It's having a conversation. And I'll be guiding us in about a 20-minute journey of understanding your core values and how they actually help you serve your clients with an emphasis on empathy. And so if you're ready to go, we can just have fun having a conversation.
That sounds great. I want to do one quick housekeeping item that I didn't mention early on. Darren and I are going to go through this process together, and then we'll have some time afterwards for Q&A, and that can be done through the chat, which is kind of open to everybody seeing it, or through the Q&A if you prefer to have something that's more confidential. But sort of keep those questions in mind as we're working through this, and keep in mind also that we are recording this session, and it will be on our YouTube channel afterwards. So that it's available for your reference as well. So
very good.
Let's go.
All right. Well, Michelle, you've gone through the guidebook, Getting to the Core. It's designed to get you to that point where you have at least a handful, less than a handful of core values. And so as you've gone through this process and you've identified several. Let's also have some context here and think about a particular client in mind that you'd want to focus the discussion on how to becoming more service-oriented to them in empathy. So do you have someone in mind that you'd like to talk about today?
Yeah, and this is maybe an amalgamation of a few clients, but primarily the details would be someone who is really engaged initially in a project and then maybe loses some interest or is maybe constantly changing the scope so that it's difficult to ground the result in something from our perspective as legal counsel as something concrete, because when it's a moving target, then kind of the context around from a legal standpoint changes as well. And so it sometimes feels like the project never gets done because it's a moving target. And the expectation is that this is a quick change. This is a quick and easy thing, but it does typically require some additional backdrops, some additional thinking, some additional context in order to make sure that we're tying all the pieces together properly. So that's some of the background context that comes to mind for some of the challenging experiences that we can have.
Yeah, yeah. So your context is that there's these clients that have well, they have different situations that affect their ability and different probably different life situations that affect their ability to really nail down what it is that we're going to securely say we're going to make progress on. That could be environmental, right? It could be personal. There's several areas that we can understand a little bit more of why it's so difficult. And if you were to kind of,
they're always thinking about the next possible thing, and so oh yeah, and what about this, and what about this, and so the target kind of gets moving, so it's always one additional change and one additional item in there.
Yeah. Now, what's important about not moving the target aside from achieving the result? Okay, what else is important about setting a target?
I would say obviously the cost to the client is kind of in the back of our mind as well, from a dollar standpoint and a time standpoint. So the ability to create solid expectations for the client around what the bill is going to be, what the timeline is going to be. So I think that's one piece that's really important. And then I think also this concern about missing something. So when you change something in one area, the trickle down effect of that is can be significant depending on the nature of that change. And so the quick question or just minor adjustment can be something more substantial. And that again goes back maybe to the first thing I said, which is ultimately timeline and cost. But the client doesn't always see it that way. They don't always see that this is a bigger thing than just that one little change. And we have to, in our role, make sure that one little change doesn't have some sort of adverse impact down the road.
Because that costs everybody a little bit more time, a little bit more money. It costs resources to adjust to these things. So if you can get ahead of it, it sounds like declare it, know the risks, then you can actually set a target and try to stick to it. Yeah, yeah. What about you in your core values have you learned is important to setting targets with clients?
So are you asking me to kind of go through the core values that I identified, or just...
Whichever one perhaps maybe aligns to the context here?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I came up with a number of them as you suggested. And two that jumped out at me that may or may not tie directly to your point there, but two that kind of jumped out at me is a need for kind of connection and togetherness. So the idea that we're all in this together, we're all kind of going toward the same goal with the same kind of rules and expectations. And I used the word kind of structure as another core value, but I kind of shifted that to reliability, in
Mm,
that the idea of having maybe a routine, or maybe, you know, something that we can all kind of come back to as structure for our work together. So
mhm,
those are
mhm.
sort of two areas that struck me as I was going through the exercises on, you know, what do I, and one of the questions I think that really was most enlightening was, where do you go to in the crisis or in the stress? And I
Right.
think that structure and that routine and that togetherness are the things that really kind of jumped out at me as answering that question.
That's great. You have a core value of structure. There's a reliability to that. So those questions of the three questions that get you from a value to a core value is really moving towards something truthfully reliable for you to lean on that doesn't de-authenticate your approach. So this is not a knee-jerk reaction. In fact, if anything, having to think about it makes it very sober that, oh, it is in fact reliable. So structure for you in this case can be reliable, and that's good. So as you look at your client and empathetically understand where they're at in terms of their business, their season, where they are in life, what are ways that structure can lead conversation so you can get better alignment to not moving targets? So based on your definition of structure, how could you take a particular client and have a discussion about structure?
So I would say what we currently do would be expectation setting. Um, expectation setting, and maybe what we do well is around timelines and cost and, you know, turnaround times, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe an area that we could do a better job, or I could do a better job given this, you know, need for structure, is the implications of changes, like making sure that that's visible, so that it doesn't cause me anxiety because we're, you know, racking up bills or we're taking longer. Making sure that that is something that's discussed up front, in a way that then gives some transparency to that experience, and you know, eliminates or at least mitigates the surprises that client might feel, because that's what's causing me anxiety, I think, is that we're not going to meet the expectations that we've set.
Yeah.
So that's one idea that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's a good one. Keep going. What are some other things that you could do to relieve anxiety from you and to be empathetic to them?
I think just acknowledging those changes and why those changes are important to the client, maybe. You know, they're coming back with, you know, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, what about this? I mean, I suppose that reflects their own anxiety
Right.
around the relationship that they're developing, or the contract that they're drafting, or the business decision that they're making. And they're looking to me to help guide them through that decision. And so maybe the anxiety that I'm feeling is not even important to them.
Yeah,
So the fact that it may take longer, cost more, is okay and acceptable,
that's right.
because for them, getting the resolution and the answers to the questions and these yeah but, or, you know, and is more important regardless of the implications. So that conversation around the implications of changing scope early on, and then as that happens, you know, just maybe calibrating and gut checking through that process with an understanding of what they need from that conversation.
Yeah, and how would you propose that as a question so that they're involved in a structure that clearly helps them understand there's a togetherness in trying to understand where we're going here and what we're agreeing to? What would you propose as a few, let's just think about the questions you can ask.
Yeah, I think I would go back to kind of the initial expectation setting and say, you know, here's where we started, and you wanted to have this signed, done, whatever kind of it is, by this date. Is that still the case? I mean, are we still on track for that? Is that still important?
Mm-hmm.
And so if that is, who needs to be involved in these conversations in order to finalize and formalize these yeah buts so that we can package them up and get it done? I suppose, thinking about the priorities of these items as well, how they fit into the bigger picture. So asking a question like, okay, here's where we were, here's where we are. How critical are these new items to making sure that this package is complete for you and for the relationship that you have? Because given your timeline, is this a critical factor?
Yeah.
Or is it ancillary? And if it's critical, then maybe we do need to adjust the timelines or adjust the expectations in order to accomplish it. Maybe if it's not, then, and so getting them to think about what it is, why it is, how it fits, and acknowledging that it's a need, but how important of a need in the bigger picture.
Right. So you've actually taken togetherness and connectedness. Because of asking a question, you're inviting them into a conversation. And you're providing some structure to that and going back to expectations. So expectations and structure kind of match up as some important words to you. Togetherness and connectedness is the invitation of doing it together, right? So that we can achieve goals together. So you're already just using your base language into engineering some maybe new ways to engage them. Now, we're not talking about particular clients. So if we were, say, doing that, we could get into some discussion about how do you envision that conversation going with Darren, perhaps, just say, use that person's name. And you can actually envision what you would want them to say or feel as an indication of your core values being authentically presented. So structure is important, and making sure that their goals are achieved, because it is still about them. Think about a particular client and how you would envision what they would say as a response to know that you're being empathetic to their situation and where they want to go. So think of somebody in particular, and that way it's a little bit more crystalline, and then you can go forward from there. Take your time.
So you're asking how they would react to those questions, or how they would react to that empathy?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the goal of being more empathetic, there's a connection to the emotional aspects of what's important to them, right? So it's demonstrating that, I acknowledge it, not just react to it, I suppose. So their reaction would be, hopefully, thanks, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
Or, you're right. Or, after thinking about it further, I can see that this, this is probably already covered in this area over here. Maybe we don't need to include it. Or, you know what, I just feel like we need to change that section entirely because it just doesn't do what I need it to do. And so, and then where I was going with that was the question around priority and how do we fit this into the priorities. So it either, isn't important because they've been able to bring that forward around, it's these fears and concerns that they're experiencing, but not maybe as important as it seems. At least it seems kind of in the anxiety picture because we've been able to bring forward how it fits into the bigger picture.
Really good.
They're grateful.
What you indicated, and it was interesting when you said it, I know you were thinking and you were kind of looking, that was kind of the thinking look, was they would say, wow, I never would have thought that way. There's a visual about that we could probably think about. So structure with visual is helpful, and you can think about a 2x2 too. I was just imagining this. If I want them to experience a empathetic connection, I understand you, and thus the response is, wow, I wouldn't have thought of that way. There's a trust there. And then the idea of reprioritizing what we said we would do versus where we're meeting now to what we need to recast to align to. Is it Is that right? Is that wrong? There's a visual to that somewhere. So what visuals do you usually use in your conversation with the client, this particular type of client, if any?
I would say we rarely use visuals. We're lawyers. We don't do creative things like that.
Okay, I seeded this question a bit. I seeded the question.
I mean, if we have a whiteboard, I suppose, depending again on the nature of the work, we use whiteboards to kind of draw out relationships. So, here's how we see these relationships interacting. And but I would say visuals are more unusual in our business.
Yeah. Yeah. When you think about a visual that can help somebody see versus just our dimension of generally speaking. I mean, my line is oftentimes just this, but even asking the question, if you had a visual to help someone become more aware that you're empathetic to them and you're not losing yourself into it, would a visual help? What would that be to help them in that journey of achievement?
Going back to the fact that I'm going pretty linear in my head on what I would create, which would be a process that sets expectations and talks about expectations through that process, and what does the journey look like for the client through this particular project. So boxes and lines with arrows that go back back and forth. But I don't know that reflects empathy. That seems to be what reflects process, and maybe they can be combined. So it's an interesting question.
Well, another way we could consider is just metaphors and similes. So, for example, it's like, and I know that you've been in many different businesses before, right? And so because of that, there is a lot that you can draw from in language about it's like this, or it would feel like this. It would look like this. This change in construction would be like this. And so that's one thing to consider with structure, simile. But that also brings in a lot of, hey, have you ever experienced this before? Well, it's like not that. It's like this. And that language could also help bring visual. So visual to combine with how you live your core values in this role as the attorney and the general counsel can add another layer. And you can use it linearly with language. So that might be something to consider. I just kind of put that there too. It just kind of came to me actually. And that's kind of the process, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and interestingly, we've talked about, how to describe the general counsel kind of model and service to folks. And there are a couple of those analogies that we've used. And, one is the idea of if you go to the doctor, you go to your general practitioner, your, quote, regular doctor for, the first line of defense, right?
Yep.
Hey, this hurts, or hey, this is happening, I'm experiencing this. And then that doctor is the one who sort of, does the initial evaluation and says, all right, try this first, try that first. Let's sort of, see if this works. And then, or they say, you need to go see this doctor, go now, right? And so that's kind of when you get into more of a specialty environment. And so, we've used that analogy for the general counsel as an example. We've also, looked at it from a kind of different way. That's the sort of specialist versus generalist approach, but something like Amazon Prime, right? So with Amazon Prime, you buy all kinds of stuff because it's free shipping, or it's one-day shipping, or it's, we'll have it there in an hour, which is still boggling to me. But you end up using more of it because you're already paying for a certain aspect. And so it's, with our general counsel model, because it's, all inclusive, hopefully they start to think about other ways to leverage the lawyer in their lives, because they're already, paying for the package to begin with. And so it basically gives them more value for the business. So the idea of analogy really kind of strikes me for this particular situation. The first thing that came to mind would be something like a construction project or a general contractor, and you come in and you say, well, we're going to just change out, the size of the tile, right? That doesn't seem like a big deal, except that it seems to me, I mean, I'm not a general contractor, but we got to remeasure everything and we got to buy a whole different set of stuff. So yeah, I mean, in principle, it's not a huge deal, but when you trickle it down, it's probably a bigger deal to them in all of the pieces that trickle down from that.
That's really brilliant. So you've taken connectivity, that's kind of a partnership thing, right? And you've made it relevant to them. You've taken structure by actually offering an invitation to talk about it this way so that you can clarify what progress needs to be made, and allowing them to see it maybe through a more empathetic perspective of a simile or metaphor that will resonate with them. If I could, I'd like to share an example of culturally how empathy doesn't work around the world. Is that okay for me to share?
Yeah, please.
Okay, all right. I worked abroad in China and then in Germany for the last 10 years. So I'm finally home in America. It's been literally 3 weeks I've been home. It's been fantastic, but I'm realizing so much that our cultures and the way we do analogies and metaphors, even within the states, the West Coast, the Midwest, they're so different. So the classic American approach, say abroad, is to give an example from a sporting type of thing. And the fact of the matter is that Americans continue to do that. They just say, oh, it's like this position or that game, and this, that. And that's just our culture. So we try and we mean well to connect with that. We try and mean well to give an analogy to that. But what we're missing is the contextual understanding of where the other is coming from. So that's where we always start with context and say, it's not about me. I am already with you. You've hired me to be a part of your team. Now I'm serving you. So tell me about what it is in Cambodia this is like. Tell me about what it is in Australia this is like, a little bit closer to the US. So that type of other perspective is important. So your core values actually help you anchor in what you really need to do. Connect together, but also how that affects others first. Yeah. So that's what you've done in a short amount of time, is come up with a few things. So I'll kind of stop there and just say, what are some new awareness that you've kind of had through our conversation today?
One of the big ones is recognizing that it's causing me anxiety. Mm-hmm. And if it's causing me anxiety, that's because there's something that's not happening in that connectedness, right? It's a discomfort in that core values. And so rather than kind of internalizing that and spinning it around inside my own head, how do we, push it out to the other party in a way to, again, build more connectiveness by talking through it in a way that is, again, contextual and reflective of them. So yeah, I mean, I can say, this whole thing is just blowing up and it's going to take forever because you've changed all these things, right? I mean, but obviously that's not the approach I would normally take anyway, but it's not an approach that's going to be particularly empathetic to the client. And so the thinking about, okay, why is that happening in my head? What is it that's causing that? And then how do we communicate that in a way to build trust, connectivity, and then structure going forward. And so having that conversation to say, hey, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm hearing. What do you think about, these questions, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
and building out those questions to get their input, their context, their approach, and maybe, giving them less anxiety because their core values are being hopefully reflected in a bit of that as well. Again, that's maybe a different conversation.
That's a great one. Yeah.
But how do we help to bring forward the things that are important to them in that conversation and acknowledge it? And probably by doing more of that, you decrease anxiety on both sides and and are able then to build more connectiveness and more structure for the future, for the future of that project. So
I think you got a lot done in 30 minutes there. Yeah, well, I appreciate that opportunity just for 30 minutes, just to talk it through, to hear yourself. Most of what came out at this stage in the last minute was you listening to yourself. You didn't compromise a single core value in any of your narrative. Actually, what you felt, or what is it like? If I were to start that, what is it like right now? You would have said, oh gosh, I have some anxiety about this. I have some fear about this. And now you're realizing that may be overrun. It is actually coming back to the core and then involving others in that. So one question and one answer and question, I should say, to the audience on this is, what is it like for you? What is it like? It goes back to the simile metaphor example that actually can help diffuse any situation. In the situation that you have, the context of the conversation, if you can sense that there's issues, then you can say, well, what is it like to experience that right now? And if you're willing to do that, you already up the empathy quotient. What is it like is the ultimate empathy question. The question is now whether or not you really are listening. And that's something that we can't help you with in 30 minutes here on the call today. But we already know, because you can look at body language, especially through the phone nowadays and through masks, right? Because the only thing you can see people's eyes. Hey, what is it like to feel that way? Oh yeah, it sounds. Oh yeah, I understand totally. We now have a world where the visuals of how people's eyes are, how their smiles are, which you can see my wrinkles. If I'm smiling for real, you could see it. These are really neat things we can observe. So there's lots of other ways that we can show empathy by picking up on these things with the people that we work with. So I'll keep it at that and let you guys take it on from here.
Yeah, I think that, that most of us, have a sense of the importance of empathy. Like we know that this is important, and in our businesses, a lot of us are professionals. We work with clients all the time, and that's something we know is important, and we feel we do it. And so to me, one of the things that was really maybe challenging was, this interest, passions, and then translating that into core values. Because it's hard to sort of say this is something that is consistent across. So if anyone on the audience would like to ask a question directly, I think we can unmute you for that. Or feel free to pop something in the chat or the Q&A, and I can ask Darren about it. Hopefully you've had a chance to go through this, because I found it really interesting, and kind of found it interesting where I got stuck in the workbook.
And that was in the beginning with the interests and passions part, right? That was discerning the differences between how they merge.
Yeah, and I think in our busy lives, you have this, what I love and what I actually do, right? What I would love to do versus what I actually do.
Exactly.
So I thought that was interesting too. So.
Well, I mean, picking up on that as we're waiting for some questions, I think this is everybody enters into the core values process in a very different place. And one of the things I found over time was core values in itself has a heavy curse of knowledge value. And in the marketing world, and when we talk about language, curse of knowledge means that it's not at 7th grade. It needs to. It's not something I can really get. Now, values itself already has a lower curse of knowledge, but when we talk about interests and passions, we find it's an easier way to begin a conversation. So to make a distinctive on the interests and passions is important. I think what's challenging is that most professionals do end up finding a difficult way to clarify that everything they do every day is part of their passions. And I think that's sobering. Now, in a perfect world, that wouldn't be a problem. We wouldn't stop to have to think about it. But since we're not in a perfect world, thinking about it may shape the way we want to restore how we do what we do. It's not always changing a job or a vocation or a company. It's usually changing ourselves. And I was telling you, Michelle, this quote: if you're a leader and a business leader out there and you do study the competition, that's good. You need to. You referenced non-legal competition out there. They're doing a certain model, Michelle, like Amazon and subscription services, things like that. But then the second level is who are the leaders that run those? Do you study them? So that's the second question. So really good leaders study the competition, they study other leaders, but the best leaders, they study themselves. And that means they need to know themselves better than they know the competition and that they know others. And oftentimes we find leaders don't spend enough time doing it. And it doesn't take much time. It just takes a few questions and a few bits of moments to just be present with yourself. That's also very, very hard. But we're finding that if we do that a little bit more, we get more present with who we are, and that in fact, we have a lot more that we're doing every day that we're passionate about. Maybe you want to increase that. So that's a conversation I've had quite a bit. Is that something that maybe you found in the process?
Well, I
Because
think
I know
it's,
you love being a lawyer and I know you love business, right? Those two things you love. So
yeah, I definitely love what I do, but I was thinking, when I was writing things down, you know, um, I love horseback riding, but I don't do that ever. I love travel, and well, as much as I love travel, that's definitely on hold right now. So you sort of think about, the things that if you had an unlimited amount of time and flexibility that you could you know do those things that you are passionate about or love all the time. Something I wanted to highlight here that I think a lot of the business owners may relate to is the idea of core values, right? So we think of, I'll talk about my kind of experience with core values. Is when I first started the firm, we have core values that are outward facing, so things that our customers would expect from us. So integrity, respect, transparency, those types of things that are crafted in a way that are for the customers to see how what we believe, I would say. Um, and then over time, the idea of core values and sort of the popular press amongst business owners and leaders is, this is something internal. This is something for the team to use in how we interact with each other and what our company means. Like, what is the kind of the why of our behavior within the company? And so, is that different? I mean, one of the exercises that we did was, okay, we created these sort of externally facing ones. Do they work internally? And we're like, oh yeah, we can sort of, package them, fine, it works. And then we did an exercise about a year ago that was on, culture and core values, which was, again, really very enlightening to have the whole team involved in that process. And then, you're taking core values to kind of a different place, more of an individual standpoint of what are the individual's core values and how do those play into the business world, and then again with some of the other work you're doing, into your community world, into your family world, into the other parts of your life. And so I kind of think that this experience with what is core values has shifted in my own experience, and so this is a new way to look at it. So I don't know if anyone's got thoughts on how core values have either been integral or been absent from your business's experience and success. So
it's a really good point. Yeah, we come from the same experience in that way, about core values corporately. So actually, the reason why I'm even in this space is because the company I worked for over 19 years, I was so attracted to their core values. And the problem over time with anything is that certain things lose luster. And what I wasn't seeing was people have fidelity to those core values. And I realized that it was because they weren't actually really important anymore. It was more about shareholder performance or sales. And we like to hide behind the fact we have those wonderful, wonderful intentions. And I realized that also, that in order to have corporate ones, you have to have personal ones, or else you don't know how to make sense of the corporate ones, enhance them and live them out further for your company, or challenge them. And the idea of going from one-on-one into personal core values helps you then make sense of how to shape what would be the core values you joined the company for. So the company I worked for, they had three. They were excellence, people, and integrity. And I don't think we should laugh that maybe those are three of anybody's companies. I think how you define them and how you live them is all that matters. And that's probably the biggest opportunity I think we all have, is how do we consistently live out connecting with people, providing structure, because they are so meaningful to me, and I know when I'm serving you, they're going to be meaningful to you, but do it in a way that's empathetic, not forcing my values on you, but having mine work with yours. So that's kind of how we wanted to make the approach, Michelle. And then I look back in the case studies and all the work that's been done on values, and Jim Collins and Jorge Porras wrote that book, Good to Great, and how that actually started this thing, how we all actually got influenced by that. It was really trying to understand living it, but no one's really cracked that. And I think it takes an individual to model that, for the executive team to model that. So I think we're on to something.
We have a question here. It says that a lot of this discussion focuses on how to use your core values. Can you briefly discuss how a company goes about selecting or discovering its own core values?
Yeah. There's a lot out there actually about how this happens, and I would simply suggest that this is the simplest way. Who do you want to become as a company? Who do you want to become as a company? The becoming process is a trajectory. And without any truth that you're going to anchor on to become more of that, then you are just going to become who everyone wants you to be. So the idea behind core values is that if you don't have core values, then there's nothing you're willing to protect. Core values means that you have something that you will protect at all costs, even if it means losing sales, losing clients, even if it means that we are not going to be as productive as we hope to be. We will never compromise these core values. So how do we identify those? Well, the first approach is, if you have people that exemplify who you want to become as a company, note those behaviors. Note those behaviors. So if I see in you these things that I want to be a little bit more like, those are the first place, because the behaviors of your core values are essentially living them. I give you an example. We have leaders that basically say, my core values is I'd like to connect with people. However, I won't turn a video on when I do a one-on-one. Now, if you had a common definition of connect, maybe one would say it has nothing to do with video. It has everything to do with the phone. So you have differences there. So the objective of this is actually to understand, well, what does it mean to connect? What does it mean to connect? And the moment that you start having that discussion, you'll realize there may be a different value that you need to protect, and it's not the word connect, okay? The other thing is that as you look for people who are behaving the way you want to become more like, have that conversation with them and ask them, why do you do this? Why is this you? And you're going to get to essentially a core value. You're going to get to something that's really true and really something that they can't compromise, because it would just feel it in their bones, and it wouldn't make sense. And we all know what that feels like. So that's one way. Look and observe the best employees and what they're doing in behaviors. The other way is you can have a roundtable, and you can host and facilitate a conversation about the one or two things that are most uncompromisable in your life that you want to bring to work. Yeah. Another example here, everyone says work-family balance. I personally have a very, very interesting relationship with that, because I don't really believe that line means anything, especially now, in a time where everything is one. It's reminding us that in the COVID time, we're all integrated in everything we do at home, work, and family. So there's got to be something that's more core than work-family balance. There's got to be something. Whatever that is, I think we all have to identify that, and then build a word that says, I can jump in on that, because if you can help me protect that, I know that I can be my best showing up every day. So those are two ways. You can do a group approach by doing it together with intimate, important things you're not willing to compromise. You could look at it from who's the best employees that exemplify who you want to become, so that you can all become more like that. And those are two really important ways. The third one is you can obviously do it yourself and see if you are willing to be able to take what you've done in that guidebook and even host a small team, a group, to just say, what are we not willing to compromise, because this is who we want to become. There's lots of places I can show you case studies of results of that too online that are free for people to look at. They're not associated with me. So there's lots of good stories out there.
Darren, I'll give an example of that as well. I mentioned that we had done a program about a year ago that was around, building culture internally. Our team has changed a bit. And like I said, we had, my magical core values from day one that we kind of tweaked and said, yeah, those still work, but, brought the team together and said, you know, who are we as a culture? And, specifically to the question, the way that the facilitator led that was, how do we define our culture? And so defining the existing culture, which is very different, I think, than defining what we want to be, because they're two different steps in the process, right? They're both important. And so, there were dozens and dozens of sticky notes back when we got to sit in a room and put sticky notes on the wall and, all these things. And the end of that, we got to a kind of phrase, which I would never, ever have come up with on my own, but freedom to flourish. And so that's something that the team felt the company provided both to the employees as well as to the clients. And that was sort of the underlying. And then underneath that, we had, what are the behaviors that exemplify that? What are the things that we do on a day-to-day basis? We're innovative, we're resourceful, we're supportive, we're, enthusiastic, all these different kind of things that kind of flow underneath that to define what freedom to flourish is. And then underneath that, you build what are the behaviors every day, the day-to-day activities that support those behaviors. What does innovative mean? What does supportive mean? What does useful mean? What is and I believe we have a prior webinar by Hillary, you probably can remind me, on that topic and that process that they walked us through, which was really, really a great process to kind of help define that culture within the business, and core values is sort of a piece of that. So
that's right.
That was our experience.
That's really good. That's good. I mean, it's always good to have a facilitator. I think that's also important. Self-facilitating after you've baked your core values is important, but having someone else come in and just referee the situation is good. It gets a lot more depth going on. So Michelle, I'm glad you did that. And that I would say is a really good step forward to say, okay, we're going to have someone and just spend a short amount of time really identifying these things that are most meaningful to us. And it's intimate, it's personal, it's messy. And another example here is that what happens afterwards. So Michelle, maybe are there things that are happening now that came from that initial session that you do to create and sustain a freedom to flourish culture?
Yeah, so we some of that work got put on hold when we, moved into the virtual environment. I mean that from an active work on it. We had things on the wall, we had, kind of little activities and games and things like that. And translating that into the virtual environment, I think is, we just haven't gotten to that yet. But I do think that when we're talking about our successes and we're talking about maybe some of the challenges, these terms are typically brought forward as part of why, what we did as a culture, as a team that demonstrates these core values as part of that success. And similarly, maybe something that we missed if we were challenged in a particular situation. So
very good. Right. So going back to when things are challenging, do you go back to what's true? When it's chaos, do you go back to that? Does it bring some sort of piece that says, okay, no, this is what we're building ourselves on. And this is who we're trying to become, more of an organization that enables freedom to flourish. It's never ending. It's not like you arrived at it. So, and that's a distinctive I want to mention about core values is that oftentimes there's a lot of written out there. And also people say, well, these are just always in you. They're innate. I actually think a little bit differently. I think the core values are always under attack. So therefore, they're not just innate, but they're under attack and you can be distracted, often too much. So they're also aspirational. They're both innately you and authentically you is the word I like to use, but they're also aspirational. You can become more of these. Without that, then we would just be platitudinal. And Michelle, you and I would agree, that's not the type of businesses we want to run, and we don't want leaders to be run platitudinal businesses, right?
Yeah, and I just double checked. So it was last June was the program that we did with Chris Anibaro. And they were talking about, we were specifically talking about adapting a culture to an online environment, because at that point in time, that was something that everybody was really, front and center. But he talked through some of that process as well. So
Cool.
I find it, complementary to this conversation. And I think, the question was right on point. We've talked about these personal core values. What about the company core values, and how do those two things align? And I think as leaders, our instinct is, well, here's what it is, right? And where it comes from, I think, is actually quite important. And then translating that as the company grows and changes, because
Yeah.
what it is when it's just me and it's my little world, is different than what it is when there's 15 people who need to also feel that and participate in that and be a part of that.
Very important. Yeah.
So.
Very important to keep the vision alive without those core values and behaviors. Very important to recast, or I should say realign to the vision, right?
So I don't see any additional questions. This is your last chance, folks. So while we are waiting for maybe a last set of questions, I'm going to just share real quick our upcoming programs. So we have this for those of you who are new to the Equinox Focus events. We do this every month. Our upcoming programs are February 18th. Next month, we're going to talk about the value of IP in your business. So what is it? How do you protect it? And why do we care? Why is that important even? And then in March, we're going to cover cybersecurity. If you've been keeping an eye on this topic, as businesses have gone virtual, it's opened up a lot of opportunities for hackers to get in, especially the smaller companies who don't maybe have as much formal infrastructure and protection. So this is a great topic on what you can do as a small business to minimize the risks beyond just, make sure you have insurance, but the practical risks of avoiding it to begin with. So we encourage you to take a look at those and sign up if they're topics of interest. And always, if there's something that's on your mind that you think would be a great presentation, we'd love to hear from you on that as well. So thought I would share a couple of those. And then if there are no other questions, Darren, maybe you can do kind of a quick wrap up around the restored leader and sort of the, like I said, something that really jumped out at me was this expansion of it into the rest of a person's life.
Yeah, thank you. So the idea behind the restored leader is that we're on a mission to help leaders be more authentic and more confident and more joyful. The joyful element is very important. In fact, if we do not have joy in where we lead, where we influence, the places of which we are actually bringing people along with us, no matter what your role or title is, then that is an effect of building a culture that you don't want to be around. If, in fact, that you do want to be more joyful in everything you do, well, then you got to get to the core. You got to get to the core of what actually makes you tick and what you're willing to not compromise. So we feel that there are three main areas of which relationships are built. First, with yourself. I guess that would be the fourth one, but let's just start there with yourself and your core values. And then the other three are how your core values, always the same, manifest at home, in community, and at work. Now, many of you may actually think that there isn't a big difference between those because it's the type of a family business run with your mom and dad and your siblings, and the clients are in the community, so you're merging circles, and that may be okay. But distinctly, we want leaders to really think carefully about how, because of relationships and how messy they are and they're different, you do need to adjust the behaviors of which your core values bind you to so that you can be effective as a leader and influencer at home, at work, and the community. So we are in the process of developing ways to help develop leaders at home. Spouses, first of all, if they have children or not, are co-leaders in their families, and understanding how to submit to those unique ways of influence is enormously important. This is not counseling, by the way. This is a little bit more based off of just, what are your core values? Do you even know what they are? Share them with each other, and how does that actually make you a better team? That manifests in the workplace, one-to-one, but also How does your team function? So the person that was asking about core value building, we do that through individuals and through teams. We have a product called Foundations where we actually invite you, your team, I call them your friends, together to experience foundations of leadership. And then the last but not least one is the community. Now, the community we determine as your client base, whoever you serve. It could be also your place of worship. It could be your neighborhood. For me, it's also the place where my kids go to school, because we have an opportunity to influence education. It's not just the teachers. So how do we do that in a way where we involve the parents of other children as well? These all take intentionality. So that is the number one core value of what we do. So we're very intentional about our conversations and where we want to spend time with you on your conversations that are intentional and important to you. So that's how we work. Restored Community and Restored Family will be opening up in the next year or so, and it's going to give us an opportunity to get non-traditional leaders involved. We see school boards, we see city councils as really, really great potentials to restore core values in their leadership. But I really have a passion for family. So I think there's always ways that we can really improve as spouses and then help our children identify their own. So if you're an 18-year-old onward or below 18, I have 3 kids under 10, you still can use good core values at home to help observe how to shape your children's values so that they'll be really, really good people for the world. So there's a lot of great reasons and excitement that's happening here at the Restored Leader.
I love this. And one of the things that you mentioned was, groups of friends as well.
Yeah.
So folks who maybe you've known from college and you've taken different paths. There's folks who are staying at home and folks who are in professional environments, folks who are in, more kind of hands-on environments, and bringing them all together with already an existing trust factor that then allows that conversation to take very different turns, because it's not just a team of people who work together or a family who lives together, but rather people who come from a core trusting relationship but have such different experiences in their lives. I thought that was interesting as well.
Very fun conversations people are having, and a lot of ahas. I didn't know that about you stuff, but in a safe environment that allows them to see that there's actually other parts of how people define leadership. And I think that's actually probably the funnest one, Michelle, because everybody defines that differently. And that's okay, as long as we understand how we got to that point and how that's going to affect our influence going forward. So real fun stuff. Well,
thank you so much. I mean, I maybe got the most out of this because I got to be the guinea pig. And then hopefully everybody else spend some time on these materials, because I know that just going through the materials was insightful for me. We will be sending out a copy of the recording to everybody, and Darren's contact information will be in there as well. So if you have questions that you just weren't quite ready to ask in this environment, feel free to reach out to him directly. You can see kind of how much passion he has and experience he has in kind of guiding people through these conversations. And like I said, the ability to uncover even little things in such a short period of time, and maybe big things in a longer period of time, is just fantastic. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you,
Welcome
Michelle.
back to the US.
Great to be home. Really great to be home.
And thanks to everybody. Have a great day.
Talk to you guys later. See you later.